Releasing more than 2 years after the PlayStation original, God of War Ragnarök aims to be a better PC game than its predecessor, and it does largely hit that mark. It offers PC players a genuinely good way to play the game. What do I mean by that? Well, I think you can see this game being a better PC port than the last one right when you get into it for the first time, where you will notice the game is DX12 as it is pre-compiling shaders. On a Ryzen 5 3600, this took a little over 10 minutes and is well worth the wait. According to the main developer Jetpack Interactive, they are compiling shaders wholesale and not falling back on unreliable QA playthroughs of the game to collect shaders to be compiled, and the result is worthy of praise. Theoretically, this means frame time spikes from shader compilation should not be found all throughout the campaign. Now, I cannot vouch for the entire campaign as it is a long one here, but I would say in my experience so far, this is the smoothest PC port from a Sony studio in terms of frame times so far. Generally, that means you won't see frame time spikes, and I think that is reflected in the subjective appraisal you can find online when you read about this port. People think it is very smooth, and it definitely plays that way. That does not mean it is perfect, though. I have found at least a handful of frame time spikes in the first few hours of play. Most, though, were quite small, with the largest being when Atreus opens this door here. There was a 50 millisecond frame time spike on my high-end system there. So frame time spikes are not completely eliminated in my experience, but they are so rare that they are not a nuisance. It's not common. Another great win over the last game is in the user experience and settings menu. If you have a widescreen monitor, you are very well supported in this game with support up to 32:9, which works really well. They went into the game and edited the cutscenes and art to make sure that this expanded FOV works. And honestly, the game's ultra-close FOV is greatly aided when playing in ultra-wide. I actually prefer playing the game this way. It's otherwise too claustrophobic for me. In the menu itself, you can now edit options in real time, which is great as you can see the results as the background goes transparent. The menu will also give you hints about VRAM and more should you be curious. These type of options menus are great as they allow users to judge the graphical cost of an effect while changing it in real time and seeing that change in real time. It is one of the best ways to do a graphical menu. There are a lot of settings here, including frame generation and all the popular upscalers, including TAAU that Ragnarök uses on the PlayStation 5. So their menu is great, but I am saddened to see that the original setting from the first game is gone now. We instead have low, medium, high, and ultra. That original setting from the last game allowed users to find out what the console version was like. So how does the game line up with PS5 in this outing? This is where I'm going to come to some aspects of the PC port of Ragnarök that I find fall short of its predecessor, and here is also the point in the video where I will start talking about issues that I encountered in the game. But before I do that, I want to strongly reiterate, as I said earlier, this is generally a really well-running game on PC that is in a lot of ways better than the last God of War on PC. If you have a modern PC, you will run this game very well, especially with things like frame generation or optimized settings, which I will get into later. Those will help you get into ultra-high FPS territory. Basically, I want to reiterate that most people will load up this game here and play with fluid frame rates and have a great time. You will have a great experience here. With that being said, this port is not perfect, and I have found a number of areas that I think take away some of the shine versus how it could be. Hence, I will be listing them out here with examples so that they can hopefully be improved in future patches. Basically, I'm using this video as feedback for the developers to improve an already great baseline experience. One of the core bits of feedback I have is that this game, unlike the last game, does not meaningfully visually upgrade the game on PC over the PS5 version. The biggest upgrade over PS5 is in image quality, which is kind of a given on PC. You can get better image quality as we see here, where DLSS or DLAA can clean up aliasing and fine detail in hair, for example, and it'll look better than PS5 in that area. But as far as I can tell, that is it. The ultra setting in this game will match PS5's quality mode. Like shadows, for example. Quality mode there is an obvious match for PC's ultra setting as it appears, but the PS5 performance mode is an interesting one. Performance mode is easier to beat in this game, as that appears to be between the low and medium setting for shadow detail and resolution in this scene. So you can at least beat PS5's performance mode here. But quality mode is a different story. Since Ultra is basically PS5 quality mode, that means there are not many meaningful upgrades beyond IQ on the PC here. That is not a big issue for a straight port, though it is disappointing because the last game did allow for graphical upgrades on PC not found on console. I also find it disappointing as the PC version here actually has worse visual quality in a number of areas compared to the PlayStation version of the game. For one, the game on PC is missing the unique cube map tracing system found on PS5's quality mode. That made it so cube map reflections more accurately aligned with the game's SSR results, leading to less visual errors like we can see on the ground here where the column lines up correctly in PS5 quality mode, but on PC and PS5 performance mode, they are misaligned, looking wrong. Another thing I noticed while playing the game on the PC is that some effects work is missing in a number of scenes only on the PC version. Take this dream sequence here on PC. I was playing it and I thought, this area looks weirdly plain, almost unfinished. I did not think too much of it and kept on playing. But then I loaded up the PS5 version and noticed how the forest you walk through has a moving mist on PS5 that is just not there on PC. I think that robs this scene of its dreamlike quality. It's a bit barren. Same with the realm between realm area. There, in simple side-by-sides, you can see that the PC version appears to be missing effects work found on the PS5 version, which makes the version on PC look a bit barren, as it lacks atmospheric details. Speaking of these realm between realm areas, another thing I noticed on PC is that portal transitions are not visually smooth. On PC, when you go through a portal, it is easy to notice how level of detail transitions rapidly when you emerge out the other side. You can kind of see objects draw in rather late, and higher levels of detail drawing in late. I noticed it as I was playing the game, and I thought, that's a bit odd. I can't imagine that being the case on console, otherwise my colleague John Linneman would have mentioned it in his original review. And upon loading up the PS5 version, it was simple to see that the portal transitions there happen smoothly with no LOD popping. I imagine some of you out there might be thinking this is the power of the SSD here, but it does not seemingly have to do anything with that. If I compare it to my wheezing PS4 Pro, we can see even that the PS4 with a 5400 RPM hard drive, very little RAM, and a tablet CPU manages portal transitions much better than a PC equipped with a Ryzen 7 7800X3D, 32 gigs of RAM, and an RTX 4090. So whatever the issue is here on PC, it does not seem to be related to the usual hardware differences. Rather, they are unsmooth for some other reason. Visuals are not the only area where issues might be occurring in the PC port at the moment. I also noticed while playing that occasionally audio seemed muffled or mixed wrong. I had trouble hearing dialogue. Now, I originally thought that is just how the game is until I loaded up the game on PS5 and I had no issue hearing dialogue even with the same volume settings. For example, here is this cutscene starting on PC.
What is this?
Everything I found. Well, almost everything.
Now here's that same cutscene starting on PS5.
What is this?
Everything I found. Well, almost everything.
Now I think you could maybe hear what I heard there. It was easier to hear the dialogue on PlayStation 5, don't you think? The last thing that I noticed being odd on PC was in regards to some unexpected performance cliffs depending upon your PC configuration, and I think these are bugs. The first unexpected performance cliff is with the game on Zen 2 processors. Ryzen 3000 series. Now PS5 uses a Zen 2 processor that is heavily cut down, so it surprised me a bit to see this. Reading online, I saw a lot of people having trouble hitting 60 FPS in this game with Ryzen 3000 CPUs. Basically, as you can see here on my Ryzen 5 3600, if you have a Zen 2 CPU like this one, you'll see many areas past the prologue where the game is just below 60 FPS and CPU limited. That in and of itself is not cause for concern, but given how the PS5 version doesn't drop a beat from 60 FPS, it made me wonder. But what especially made me wonder was when I measured how much Zen 2 is underperforming in this game versus others. Usually when I measure the difference between Ryzen 5 3600 and Ryzen 7 7800X3D, the latter tends to run games at roughly 2 times the average frame rate. Like check out here in Space Marine 2. At launch I measured nearly 108% higher average frame rate on the 7800X3D, a little less than 2x in Dragon's Dogma 2, as we see it being 95% higher average frame rate on the 7800X3D. And on the high end of the averages, we have something like Crysis 3 Remastered, which is a bit more than 130% faster on the Ryzen 7 7800X3D. God of War blows these metrics completely out of the water. There, the 7800X3D is performing 247% faster in average frame rate than the Ryzen 5 3600. Now, you may be thinking this is some 3D cache shenanigans here on the 7800X3D, but the weirdness is maintained with comparisons to smaller chips, such as the 5600X. For comparison, let's look at Crysis 3 again. There, the 5600X performs 39% faster than the Ryzen 5 3600. That's on the high end of the average difference. In God of War Ragnarök, the 5600X performs a 99% faster than the 3600 in this game. It doubles the frame rate essentially. These are both similarly spec'd 6-core 12-threaded chips, and Zen 3 pretty much never performs this much better than a Zen 2 equivalent under similar core configurations. Looking at average core utilization, we can see that there is a lot more per thread utilization there on the 5600X, which might correlate with its much higher frame rate. For some reason, Zen 2 chips from the Ryzen 3000 series perform really poorly in this game in comparison to other titles. They scale much worse than other CPUs in a similar weight class, and I actually think it's a bug. Another performance cliff that I found in the game has to do with tessellation, seemingly. Originally in the pre-release version of the game before launch, mostly every area in the game ran really fast on the GPU. The 4090 could be easily a great deal north of 100 FPS at the highest settings with DLAA on when things were calm, and it could be at worst in the upper 70s when you got into heavier combat. That was the general experience, except in the realm between realms. That's the area I showed off earlier with missing fog effects. When you could go in there, in the pre-launch version of the game, it would be in the 40s at the ultra settings. And as a reminder, the ultra settings in this game are essentially the quality mode settings on PS5, which runs at a native 4K 30 FPS. That would mean the 4090 here is really underperforming in these areas. Why am I talking about the pre-launch state though? The post-launch version of that scene runs much better, above 60 FPS at least. The reason I'm talking about it is because now post-launch I noticed that the ground in this area was deforming rather close to the camera in a way that it did not before launch. It appears as if the tessellation density has been pulled in significantly in a visibly obtrusive way. So now when you walk around there, the floor is kind of unstable looking and a bit strange. Using that post-launch patch compared to PS5, we can see that the tessellation value in this area of the game is lower than the PS5's performance mode even. And this only applies to this area, mind you. This is really odd, as for some reason here, and only here, tessellation is stupidly expensive. I'm talking about cutting your frame rate in half on an RTX 4090 levels of expensive. In other areas of the game though, with similar levels of ground deformation, tessellation cost is negligible. Tessellation costing next to nothing these days lines up with what we see in other modern titles on modern NVIDIA hardware, where tessellation has always been NVIDIA's strong suit. Basically, like how Zen 2 is underperforming strangely in this game, so are these realm between realm areas where tessellation suddenly becomes perplexingly more expensive. The last performance cliff I noticed in the game was in the aforementioned ultra-wide mode. Yes, the game in general typically has very clean frame times with few spikes, but that only applies to users of 16:9 screens. I have found out in ultra-wide that the game actually has surprisingly poor frame times. I noticed this originally while just trying to play the game with a locked 60 FPS in ultra-wide. While playing, I was noticing how the game was constantly dropping VSync lock during normal traversal and very simple play. Essentially, I was seeing frame time spikes in areas where I was seeing none at all at higher 16:9 resolutions. So it was running a lot less smoothly in ultra-wide. I unlocked the frame rate then and tried VRR out, and that showed me what the problem was. Basically, while playing, a number of areas or things you do start causing the frame time to seesaw very intensely in my experience. You see long frames and short frame times back to back. Some of these long frames are a lot longer than the short frames. think 6 milliseconds, bass shooting up to like 18 milliseconds all of a sudden in a rapid staccato. That is why I was seeing VSync breaking. Long frames were doing that. This frame time behavior though also makes it so the game doesn't look visually smooth while playing in VRR with unlocked frame rates. Just check out the difference in frame time health between 16:9 and ultra wide. Ignore the differing frame rate here and just look at the frame time deltas. Butter smooth gradations there in 16:9, while I see a sawtoothed look in the ultra wide mode. So while ultra wide is a really nice feature and is generally well supported from a visual perspective, performance-wise, it is in not a very good place at the moment, as it produces unstable sawtooth frame times that can disrupt FPS capping or lead to a poor VRR experience from a visual perspective. The last two improvements I would like to see to this game in a patch have to do with some of the settings. As I showed off earlier, the game supports ultra-wide monitors and the game looks great that way. But if you're on a 16:9 monitor, there is no field of view slider and the game view is rather cramped there. Basically, I would like to see an FOV slider in this game, as we know wider FOVs work because the ultra-wide modes work. That would be an easy win for a patch. Perhaps a less easy win for patching is changes to upscaling. Right now, upscaling in the game works like it does in every other title with the same quality differences we usually see, except on SSR, where water breaks nearly every upscaler to varying degrees. With DLSS, it becomes a flickery mess. TAAU and FSR fare a little bit better, but XeSS is curiously the only one that manages to keep flicker down. Something about SSR in this game does not like upscaling in a big way, and I imagine it could be fixable given how this is a unique issue with this title that we do not see in other ones. Essentially, I would like to see more polish to the title post-launch to help improve on the foundation, especially regarding graphical quality. As a rule, I generally find it rather bad form to release a PC title with worse presentation aspects than the console version, especially 2 years after release of that console version. The PC really should be the place where the game shines the brightest, so I hope dev time can go into that to bring things up to par there. There should be fixes for missing visuals, fixes to strange performance pitfalls, and of course added in graphical features from that PS5 version that are missing on PC. Ragnarök on PS5 was a hyper-polished game when it came out, and with some changes, the PC version could achieve that level of prestige, as it's currently missing.
Stop thinking like a father for a moment and start thinking like a general.
No!
Getting into optimized settings for mid-range GPUs, I found that they were rather simple to derive. First with tessellation. Although tessellation runs really poorly and halves the frame rate in the realm between realms, that area makes up a generally small portion of the game, and it is most likely a bug. In other areas of the game, tessellation is very cheap on the GPU, even on the ultra setting, which adds in a nice detail boost over high. Here I recommend the ultra setting for optimized settings. For volumetrics, each setting reduces the quality of volumetric light shafts and shadows. But since it is temporally amortized, the differences are hard to see except when you get down to low, which can cause flickering and obvious banding. Here, due to the small bump in performance, I recommend the medium setting for optimized settings. The model setting adjusts the quality of level of detail at a distance and is one of the most effective settings to reclaim performance. Here for a mid-range GPU, I recommend the medium setting for the best performance in the heavier parts of the game, where it can return 16% better performance over ultra. But should that be too much for you, high is also a good compromise for those with upper-end mid-range GPUs. The reflection setting generally is not very important for performance. Over surfaces of water, the differences in quality settings is minimal till you get down to low, which reduces the amount of reflections visible in screen space on the vertical axis, cutting them off. In spite of that, it has no performance win in this scene on a RTX 4060 at 1440p DLSS quality mode. Indoors though, you can see some more differences. For one, the low setting reduces the amount of surfaces which get SSR, like this floor here, while the ultra setting increases the roughness cutoff further, allowing for duller metals like we can see on the ground here to get SSR applied to them at a performance cost. That difference though is very minor as I see it, and I think the little performance win from high is worth it for optimized settings. Like in many games, the shadow setting is one of the best to reclaim performance, but only after the high setting here. Between high and ultra, only the shadow cache in VRAM changes its size, with minimal difference to quality or performance. At medium, shadows become lower resolution, but still look handsome, I would say, with a nice 12% performance win depending upon the scene. Low reduces shadow resolution further and starts turning off shadows from certain objects, but it has a huge performance win. Here I recommend the medium setting for optimized settings. The lighting setting is one I recommend leaving at ultra. Between medium and high and ultra, I could not see a visual difference, while low turns off some fill lighting which looks to be used to emulate the effects of bounce lighting. This is most visible if I flash it back and forth between medium and low. That small win in performance from going to low though is definitely not worth the visual hit. Ambient occlusion is a setting I would not recommend touching as well. Due to TAA's effect on it, you won't see a difference between the settings in terms of quality, with only low looking slightly less stable. The performance though is unchanged on this GPU, so set this to whatever placebo value you like. Lastly, we have textures. Here between ultra and high, we once again see only a difference in reserved space for textures in VRAM changing, with no quality difference. The medium and low texture setting though degrade quality, as we can see on the lid and the side of this pot here, where the texture is now less sharp. But honestly, it still doesn't look bad on medium or low. For 8GB GPUs, I recommend the high setting to ensure headroom on the GPU to prevent possible frame time spikes. In total, the wins from optimized settings will be scene dependent, where here indoors in an expensive area, we see an 18% performance win for very minimal differences in visual quality. Here in this expensive outdoor scene though, we see an even bigger boost. Optimized settings increase performance by 31%, being very much so worth it, I would say, for something like an RTX 4060. Coming to the conclusion here, I would say God of War on PC is most of the time, for most PCs, a really well-running port. It is only when you get down into the details and compare to PS5, use a Zen 2 CPU, or use a less common aspect ratio that you will start to notice some issues. If the issues I mentioned in this video were cleaned up with patches over time, then this port on PC would attain the hyper-polished status that it enjoys on PlayStation consoles. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that like button, subscribe, ring the bell, support on Patreon, comment below, and as always, this is Alex bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.